any other interests. When you're talking about preservation of civil rights or personal freedoms, I think it's appropriate to be able to argue in full force to a impartial jury and judge, and it's necessary to be able to come up with legitimate, um, enforceable resolutions to those kind of disputes. That said, I was never much of a litigator. I did a little in early part of my career, but I've been a transactional attorney, and um, transactional attorneys are often educated the same as the litigators to represent their client zealously, um, maybe even single-mindedly. But it doesn't take too long to realize that there are shortcomings to that approach. Um, a commercial transactional attorney has to realize that their clients' objectives are not generally to destroy the opposition, to defeat the opposition, to have victory over the opposition, um, unless they get into litigation. Um, and so attorneys, transactional attorneys, and litigation attorneys as well, recognize the necessity of understanding what the other side is thinking, what their interests are. If it's litigation, you need to understand it from the standpoint of how to counter it or deal with it in your own presentation. Uh, in a transactional approach, your um, employer or client will not be happy with an attorney that screws their deal. Um, as long as the attorney keeps them on the right side of the law, they need to also consider how to help facilitate a negotiation and an agreement. So that's the topic of this month's forum. If you've been lucky enough to hear the previous three, we had a lot of discussion about um, sort of the macro approach to uh, peace building, conflict resolution, which has been fascinating. I've been just thrilled by Bob and Randy and Mei's um, presentations. I'm going to try and pull it back a little bit to look at more of a micro view and discuss uh, what I've learned in the last few years as a mediator and in my career about reaching resolutions to issues um, and hopefully avoiding conflicts. So the first question, some of you, and I welcome some of my friends who've come on and are not necessarily familiar with Rotary. Um, I'd like to just say a word about the need for peace builders. This little graphic here is perhaps a somber look at it, but you can see that in the wide world, there's a great need for peace building. Um, uh, the world has been at war for a long, long time, one place or the other, and uh, hopefully the time for peace builders has come. Why is Rotary involved in this? Well, it actually turns out that Rotary has 7 areas of focus, and the 6th one, Rotary Area of Focus 6, is peace building and conflict prevention. That is recognized, and that 6th is not a level of priority, it's just the 6th area of focus that's been added to the current list of 7 over more than a century of Rotarian work. And it turns out Rotary is pretty well situated for uh, a focus on peace building. Most people, if they know about Rotary, they know more about the humanitarian efforts to eradicate polio, to work on water and hygiene systems, and all manner of things that are of great benefit to the world. But peace building and conflict prevention is definitely part of that process, and um, Rotary has pursued that for many years now with the award of peace fellowships, up to 130 a year, people who are seeking master's degrees or postdoctorate and things like that, studying around the world at a number of different universities. A quick check showed me that there are 1,400 Rotary Peace Scholars currently operating in 115 different countries. Rotary is a non-sectarian, non-political organization, and it is positioned as such because of its humanitarian efforts as well, to be perhaps more acceptable in many countries. And organizations like the Peace Corps are seeking partnerships with Rotary, again, because of its ability to operate in countries that may not welcome uh, even well-meaning interference or participation in their internal activities. Um, a few years back, maybe 7 or 8, I was amazed doing some work for people in Zimbabwe that honestly the only way to get connected to ship things into Zimbabwe to help, in this case, an orphan care center, uh, was either through Rotary or Catholic Charities. Those were the only two non-governmental organizations that were permitted at the time. So that's one of the reasons Rotary is working on this. I also mentioned Mediators Beyond Borders International. This is a relatively newer organization, something like Doctors Without Borders, that has assembled a cadre of trained mediators who take some risks in entering into hotspots around the world to see if they can assist. I believe MBBI has assisted in 5 or 6 at this point. And they also are looking to team with Rotary again because our network of connections and a number of the mediators are former Peace Fellows. Um, it's a natural fit. Um, so, purpose today will be to look at what I'm hoping to do is share some of the skills and techniques and methods that I've learned from a short career as a mediator and a long career as an attorney uh, that I believe are transferable to peace builders. But I also recognize peace builders as people, every one of us in our own lives and careers, uh, having the opportunity to prevent conflict in our own lives and in the lives of people around us. Some of these techniques hopefully are helpful. So here you got Rick and Ilsa. It's easy to see that 3 little people and their problems don't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world. Great movie, Casablanca. But Bogey's completely wrong. Even within the context of his own movie, um, the conflict, the dispute, the issues between Ilsa and Rick, personal in their nature, absolutely stand in the way of the large issues of impending World War II and whether Victor Laszlo is going to be able to escape Casablanca. Um, I just use that as a small example of how even in our own lives, dealing with or being equipped to deal with disputes and conflicts, you just don't know how far that's going to reach. Like I said, I formed Garner Mediation Services 3.5 years ago now, and I received 40 hours of mediation training. That is the requirement for becoming a professional member of the Mediation Association of Colorado, as well as a bunch of doing a bunch of mediation. So I've done hundreds of hours of mediation, largely in a volunteer mode for courts. I'm sorry. Oh, if You're welcome to ask questions during the process. You can also put them in a chat, and Jim Halderman will be monitoring the chat, and will either interrupt with a question that's immediately pertinent, or we will hopefully have time at the end to have some open forum discussion. But in any case, Jim already read you the quote, and you can see it there. Karl Popper is one of the people I read, and he was a philosopher and scientist, lived most of the 20th century, 1902 to 1994. And his point that really struck home with me was that, and again, he was speaking about science, but also applying it to the social sciences. There should be no assertions that allow no dispute. If there are arguments, in fact, there must be arguments. For science to progress, any stated theory needs to be challengeable. And that is the credo that I've operated my mediation practice under. So I got going at the beginning with rock, paper, scissors. That is the initial method by which a lot of us resolve disputes. That is clearly a win-lose resolution method. There will be no progress because one person will win and one person will lose, and quite possibly a pair of scissors will be destroyed or a piece of paper will be cut. But the fact is that true resolutions can't be win-lose. If someone's going to lose, someone's not going to be happy. Someone's going to undermine, if they can, the resolution. And even in court, the courts recognize this, and they create penalties for people. They have to create penalties for undermining resolutions that are achieved through the court system. Resolutions need to be peaceful, fairly met, and lasting or enduring. So what I've learned about mediation is there are three approaches, three models. And again, I'm going to talk to it in part as a mediator. These are models that if you engage mediation, you'll be exposed to. But if you're simply in your own negotiation or dispute, I think they're applicable. I certainly try and apply them when I'm interacting with other people, family, friends, business contacts, anything that involves a discussion of choices, whether it rises to the level of a dispute or not. These techniques are useful. So the starting point for mediating disputes is a facilitative mediation. Parties that have a common interest can often achieve this on their own, but if you are mediating it, it's simply a matter of trying to help them achieve their common goal. If they don't recognize it, helping them to recognize it. Easier said than done sometimes, and we'll be talking about the difficulties of these negotiating techniques. But the advantages of facilitative mediation or negotiation are obviously that it's less expensive than going to court if there's a disagreement. I like the idea of the artist who feels that their action is really releasing from a block of stone the artwork, the sculpture that's already in there, or the painter who feels that the painting was on the canvas, they just had to bring it out. A facilitator can help achieve a resolution that was there for the making, that perhaps the parties just didn't realize. thing that often blocks um, easy resolution of disputes is a variety of entanglements, emotional concerns, and certainly disagreements about facts and issues and projections of what will happen in the future. Um, and what I've found is when there is a dispute that comes to a mediation, even if it's fairly straightforward, a business dispute over how much rent needs to be paid or something of that nature, there's almost always a relationship involved with it. And a transformative mediation will target those common interests and include in those interests the relationship that existed between the parties. Um, so naturally, you'll find this in family matters, divorces, uh, will disputes, uh, all manner of personal interactions. But honestly, in my practice so far, I find these relationship issues in almost every mediation I've seen. It brings to mind for me uh, a business dispute where there was a young and up and coming uh, company, a design company that designed models for trade shows and um, advertisements and things like that. And they were all excited and they were able to connect with a manufacturing company here in Colorado that had a great reputation, and their product would gain reputation by having been manufactured by them. It was definitely a win-win situation, and they formed that relationship. And then shortly thereafter, uh, the Colorado company, because of its great reputation, merged, was acquired by a national manufacturing company out of state. And in the course of that, uh, uh, issues arose. Some of the work, maybe due to miscommunication, maybe due to the confusion of an ongoing merger. Um, some of the work that the young company, design company, needed done didn't get done in a timely fashion or to the quality that they expected. And I was sad. um, the merger finally ended, and the company didn't want to pay their last bill. They just sort of ignored it because they hadn't gotten what they thought they had agreed to. They didn't want to burn bridges because they're still this young and up and coming company, and the manufacturer was now perhaps even more reputable because of the association with the large national company. The large national company, though, had no idea what was going on, and they looked at the books and they sued this young company for payment without absolute, without adequate communication because they didn't have the relationship that the original owner had. So that woke up the young company and they countersued. In fact, they countersued for much more than the amount of the bill that it was claimed they owed. And they sued for for failure to perform the original contract and and for lost client, because without that contract, they lost a client and they lost reputation, and it was bitter. It was sad. This was prime for transformative mediation. Uh, and, with good foresight, the national organization actually invited back the original owner of the Colorado company, who knew both sides, and with mediation help, uh, was even brought to the point of apologizing for things that he definitely felt were something that could be apologized for. And I'm glad to say that we were able to come up with a settlement that not only got the young company back on its feet, but allowed the building of the new relationship with the new national company. It's not to say that always happens, and frankly, the worst case I can think of where it wasn't possible was a child custody dispute. Those are ugly. Um, Normally, in a transformative or in a family dispute or a relationship dispute, you can try and appeal to the relationship that once existed. You can sometimes bring people down off the precipice by reminding them at one time there was love here, or at one time, or that there are children at stake or at issue. Uh, but one case I got involved with, uh, we spent a lot of time. We had 3 separate 2-hour meetings over the course of 6 months. And in the middle of the third one, it was just obvious to me that one party, the father in this case, had no intention of settling a dispute. What he was doing was trying to gather evidence to go into court, and he was fully intending to go into court, and nothing was going to be proposed, and there was no relationship rebuilding that he was interested in. Um, that is sad. And the last kind of mediation that you'll run into is evaluative. This is where it appears that the interests of the parties, or at least one of the parties, is victory at the expense of the other party. And these are tough. However, there is an approach, and that is to obtain uh, or offer, if you can, uh, an analysis of the pros and cons related to settling the conflict or not settling the conflict. Obviously, this would be references to cost of going through court, but also, lost relationships. What will the kids think of you if you push this to the max? Um, Now, evaluative mediation, if it's in a business environment, often can be quite expensive, so it has its own costs, although still not as much as court usually. But uh, it does require the mediator or the party who's attempting to mediate to have some expertise about what uh, uh, what they're talking about. So now I'd like to move on to some of the principles and the techniques in a little more detail. So the first stage of any mediation, in my experience, and if it's outside of a mediation, I would encourage individuals. If you are in a dispute, try this first. This should be the first thing that happens, and later maybe we'll get some comments on whether this isn't the first stage of peace building as well. And that's to listen intently. The uh, the the main point the key to resolving any dispute um, is going to be listening so that you can discern the interests of the parties. If you're a mediator, you need to listen intently to all sides. If this is uh, a dispute that you're involved with personally, you'll need to, maybe against your inner desires, listen to what the other side has to say and do what you can to get them to listen to you. People shouting at each other, not listening to each other, is not going to lead to any uh, peaceful, fair, or lasting resolution. There's also an advantage to listening. Um, if you really do want to settle the dispute, you need to know what the other side thinks. This is what I was saying about even litigators need to know what the defense or prosecutor intends to argue. Uh, but in day-to-day disputes, what we're talking about are what is keeping the other party or parties from obtaining what it is they want, and can you do anything about it? Other advantage of listening is that it's going to demonstrate care for the parties. If you're a mediator, you are uh, not going to take sides. You are independent uh, and non-biased, but you do need to show the parties, or it helps to show the parties that you care about this dispute, about their concerns. And so listening is the way to do that. So I'm going to give my voice a little break here, and I'm going to see if we can participate in a um, little exercise. I actually got this out of the last Rotary magazine. Um, Obviously, listening is not necessarily as simple as it sounds. It's not just hearing; it's understanding. If you've ever tried it, one of the things that takes practice is listening intently for more than a minute. And in many of the mediations I run into, people want to go on. I mean, you have to draw a line somewhere, but you also have to let them, give them the opportunity to express um, everything that's going on. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But the actual effort is a little strenuous. I always find myself pretty exhausted after a mediation. Question is, can you listen to everything before drawing conclusions about what you have heard? So if it's your own dispute, that's especially hard. If you're a mediator, you have to keep that in mind. Don't don't come to conclusions before everyone's had a chance to have their say. So I'm going to give you a second now. Hopefully you have a piece of paper or a pencil, a crayon, anything near you. I'll give you a couple seconds to pull that together. And I'm going to do is uh, intone 8 words. And I'm going to ask each of you to listen intently uh, and consider what you think I'm talking about. This does not need to be a work of art, but I'd like you to try and draw a picture of it so that you can hold it up to the screen and we'll see uh, what everybody hears. If you're not comfortable drawing, you can just write in a big word what you think it is. So here we go. And you don't have to write down the words. I'll show them to you in a second. Tall, useful, inspiring, enduring, scenic, encouraging, memorable, valuable. Hear those 8 words. Just take a minute or two to jot down either in picture or word what you think I'm talking about. All right. Stick figures are fine, but just hold it up to your screen and let's share what we came up with. All right, I see a redwood, a tree. I see mountains. Yep, more mountains. I'm not sure if that's a volcano or a tower with a building with a flag on top. Wonderful. Is that the Sears Tower, Bob? I was in Chicago for 3 years. I go with that. So I was thinking actually of a waterfall, big, tall waterfall. Um, the point here is that obviously different things popped into our minds based on who we were. I was trying to read the words um, rather monotone, but probably failed at that. The thing to note here is that all 8 of these words are adjectives, no nouns. And when you're listening intently, you need to pay special attention to those adjectives. So if someone's talking about, if your disputes about a contract and you want to say um, um, it was a rushed contract or a um, um, legalistic contract, terms like that, or ironclad contract. That's going to give you some of the hints to what the issues are related to this contract. So let's move on. The second rule of Peace Club. Listen intently. Yes, same rule. Just to impress again, They're assisting others to resolve a conflict or negotiating a resolution to your own conflict with someone else. Recognize the conflict is just the tip of the iceberg. There's lots of models like this. Uh, if you're a mediator, the issues will probably be the easiest thing to discern because the people who hired you or the complaint in the court will point them out pretty straightforwardly. But if you look down there at the bottom of that pyramid, you'll see unresolved issues from the past. I don't think I've had a mediation that didn't involve unresolved issues from the past. And those are important issues because it may very well turn out that a fair, peaceful, lasting resolution is going to have to address not only the issue above the water, but the issues below. So in our case about the young design company and the now national manufacturing company, if they go to court, the issues will revolve around what's above the water, what did the contract say, why did the client get lost, was the work adequate, um, and the court and maybe a jury, probably not, will come to a decision, and that will be the decision, and there will be no further argument. The young design company likely will not get the benefit of reputation restored or reputation built by associating with this manufacturer. Manufacturer won't get a ground floor business in their um, list of clients. Uh, a lot can be lost. There'll be a resolution, but a negotiated resolution is going to address those unresolved issues, those other interests. If you look in the middle, needs and desires, as we were listening, trying to decide why the parties had come to the point of filing lawsuits against each other. Um, so listen intently, and again, that will allow the progress that we're looking for, not only a settlement, but progress toward the next stage. Next, I'm going to go through 4 principles that these are mine that relate to negotiating settlements, and I think they are applicable to macro settlement of disputes as well. We've been talking about listening, so just to add a little to that, once you as the mediator, or once you as the person who's acting most adult in a dispute has heard what other parties have to say, you want to summarize what you heard. It might seem like a waste of time, well, everybody heard what you said, but our little experiment showed you that, well, not everybody heard the same thing. And it's important, again, to summarize what you heard. And if there's something that you aren't sure about, if something wasn't clear, by all means, ask questions, but ask them calmly. You don't want to make the opponent or the other side or any of the parties defensive. You ask open-ended questions. So if you're talking about a contract, instead of saying, well, did you sign the contract? That's a yes or no question. An open-ended question is going to have room for some explanation. So you might say, well, at this point, you described that last meeting. What did you feel was the status of your arrangement? Encourage further conversation, further explanation. Now, I also warn mediators, only ask questions you really have, not to make a point. Now, a good mediator is not going to do that. Two people without a mediator might, and particularly two people with two sets of lawyers, uh, this turns into a problem. Um, the lawyer, if they have their client's best interests at heart, will recognize that the mediation session, a negotiation session, is not the time to be trying to make points. But many lawyers will slip into wanting to demonstrate to their client, that they're going to be their defender, that they're going to zealously represent them. I have been in a mediation where about 10 minutes in, one party had an attorney and the other party did not. This was a custody dispute again. And the parties that had an attorney, that attorney was absolutely destroying the mediation by questioning the summary of, by the mediator, by stepping in and attempting to disqualify questions that the mediator was just trying to clarify. And he actually told the parties to leave the room. And he told the attorney, if you don't stop this, I'm going to end the mediation right now. I'm going to march right up to Judge so-and-so's office, because this was a court-ordered mediation, and tell him that I can't mediate because you are making it impossible. And that solved that problem, and the mediation went forward. So again, I don't think anybody on this screen would do this, but keep in mind, um, attorneys may help as mediators. We don't bar attorneys from attending the mediation sessions. Uh, if the parties want the attorneys to stay out, we will certainly let the parties talk to us and talk to each other on their own. And maybe afterwards we can get a comment on whether attorneys are helpful in macro mediations, peacemaking, peace building efforts. The second stage of peacemaking, mediation, which I akin to peacemaking, I think, uh, is to, having heard everything, see if there are some overlapping areas or overlapping interests. Is there something to build on? The would point out that you can overdo this. I mean, you're not going to browbeat the parties into agreeing to something, but if you just point out that, you both said that this one provision of the contract was not properly worded, it's something to build on. This next one, I think, is a real problem for a lot of mediators. Having heard everything, and especially if you're a lawyer, since we're trained to be problem solvers, you're going to know the answer, right? You're going to know what should happen next. You cannot do that. As we said, mediation, if possible, is the discovery of an answer that was already there, but it has to be discovered by the parties. So it is a difficult point, especially maybe with cantankerous parties, when you want to knock their heads together. You can't do that. You have to let them come to the answer themselves if they're going to. That's what will make a strong resolution. And again, this is more in case there are attorneys involved, or if you're doing this without a mediator. You, at the end of the listening part, there has to be an arrival at a state of accepted facts. There may not be many. Many facts may be in dispute. That is not the end of a mediation. If determining the facts is your primary goal, then your best bet probably is to go to court, because a judge is just going to tell you what's right and what's wrong, and then you'll have your answers. And most likely, at least one party will be unhappy, and quite possibly both. Mediation is to try and is to progress, to try and come up with an answer that at least to some extent is a benefit to all the parties concerned. And it also goes without saying, perhaps, you can't stand on facts that are not agreed to that have not been presented, that are not in evidence, and exaggerating facts doesn't help either. So in this stage where we're sort of laying out what's agreed and what has to be agreed, um, it's very important to be accurate. The third stage, oh, I'm sorry, one more. um, at this stage, things start to go awry and people are yelling at each other, the mediator will separate the parties, and we call this a caucus, um, because nothing is going to be agreed to if harsh words are beginning to be exchanged. And I imagine that is also true in peace building and peace negotiations, although I bet it also happens in peace negotiations. Third stage uh, is the negotiating, down to brass tacks. Now, here, I think there are all kinds of strategies. We're not going to try and do this with any huge detail. Just a couple points. You need to recognize that people don't necessarily agree on what's most important, and that's fine. One person's most important issue is not what another person's most important issue. In fact, that can be the way to build a settlement, because if both parties are able to get their most important issue dealt with, uh, the fact that they disagree on what's most important doesn't matter anymore. And I sometimes look to an idol in Galileo, who pointed out, I've never met a man so ignorant that I couldn't learn something from him. Now, for one of the people who was probably the most wise and intelligent on earth at the time of his life, that's something to have been said. Um, you can't just assume that um, that you're right and everyone else is wrong. If you want to read a resolution, you have to consider um, your true objective being to get your interest addressed, even if it means perhaps pretending that the other person's interest is important. You might need to devil advocate your own understanding of your own interests. Is this really what's most important to you? Um, if you are, well, the other element to this is recognizing that whether you believe in something that the other side or other parties believe or not, you do need to consider solutions that address it. So you can't dismiss the other side's interests, even if you don't understand them. Like I said, pretend to understand them. And uh, this really gets to two of the prime tenets of Rotarians. Number two, is what you are proposing fair to all concerned? Number four, is it beneficial to all concerned? Um, if you keep those concerns, those considerations in your mind, and you can be courageous about it, that will lead you to a lasting settlement in many, many cases. No one wants to make the first offer. And a way that mediators can serve and facilitate is by being a sounding board for the parties. Again, meet with them separately and say, well, what is your bottom line? I won't tell the other side. That will be confidential. I won't tell the other side what your bottom line is. But if you tell me yours and they tell me theirs, I can at least let you guys know if you're close. I can, to some extent, relieve that nagging fear that you're leaving money on the table or over offering. Um, if there isn't a mediator involved, if this is you need to know your own bottom line. You have to be honest with yourself, because in the end, um, you might want to make the first offer. Because if you can get as much as you wanted out of the negotiation, does it really matter that much if you left money on the table that you could have gotten more? Mediators often talk about how, gosh, I would have held out for more, because sometimes a settlement will come in. But you have to believe that each party knows what their own interests are and is responsible for getting that which makes the settlement acceptable to them. And finally, People cannot be forced to change beliefs. If your main interest is to make another person believe as you do, then even going to court's not going to help you, because as again Galileo demonstrated, when forced to recant his understanding, his that the Earth goes around the sun, he recanted it. But it's always rumored that as he led away, he murmured, "And yet it moves." Forced changes are not resolutions, and they'll often fail in a short time. If you are trying to mediate an issue and it is clear that the objective is to change minds forcefully, or, well, it may be unmediatable. And that's the last thing we'll talk about. So let me ask you, understand that you can't argue for the impossible in a negotiation. I would encourage you not to read The Art of the Deal. The concept of asking for way more than you want, way more than is even possible, so that you'll come down to something that is possible. It's not a good way to arrive at a true resolution. And if parties are doing that in a mediation, if we can tell, we'll say, listen, we're going to end this mediation because you're not negotiating in good faith. So going in, understand you can't ask for the impossible. And here's poor Charlie Brown. I've never had to mediate a dispute like this, but no one's going to be able to convince Charlie Brown to stop being Charlie Brown. If you can't see all that, shrink your thing on that side. It says, the trouble with you, Charlie Brown, is you are you. Now, it is possible that conflicts may be unmediatable. But let me ask you this. Where do you always find your car keys? Everybody knows the answer to this. Your car keys are always in the last place you look, right? Because that's the last time you're going to look. Similarly, every dispute is settled in the last minute. Don't give up prematurely. You can set times, you can set boundaries. Say, we're not going to talk about this more than 4 hours or 2 hours, or 2 hours, we'll take a break, and then 1 more hour, and that's it. And that's useful. Time pressure can focus the mind. But honestly, every dispute I've been able to see settled was settled in the last minute. Now, here's an acronym for you. It stands for Best Alternative to No Agreement. This is not a threat. This is not a force. This is not something that you say to another party. And it's a tool that mediators use, usually separately with each party, to say, look, we've gone around and around. What in your mind is the best alternative to our leaving this table without an agreement? And they may say, well, going to court because I'm going to win at court. And if they honestly believe that, you may be done. But you can point out that a lot of things happen in court. You can point out things that you've observed, saying, well, I know you're saying that your signature on that contract doesn't count because after it, there was further discussion. And you may win that. I have no idea. But what if it is held? What will happen? What are you facing? What concerns you about not having an agreement leaving this mediation? And if you're dealing with irreconcilable differences or interests, consider that you can shift the conversation to the secondary interest, and there almost always are secondary interests, that if you can get agreement on a lesser point, maybe something that both parties or all parties agree is not the main point, an agreement on the secondary interest can very well create momentum toward a final agreement on the whole dispute. That is it.
And I have a couple of questions, Greg, when you're ready.
All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and take them?
Great, great. I got a great question from Al Rubin who asked, generally, negotiations begin with a set of facts that are the same for both sides. How do you deal with a negotiation partner working from a different set of facts?
Well, this the mediations I've been involved with, and again, I'm not what you'd call a high level, negotiating between countries, but it seems to me that rarely is there a agreed set of facts. Uh, the whole point of court actions is to force a settlement, an agreement on the set of facts. So what I do is try and find any facts that are in agreement and put them up on a whiteboard, or simply have it said. Does everybody agree that um, um, there was going to be a sale of this product? I mean, just even at the most basic level, find what facts you can agree to. And then ultimately, you may just want to tell the parties that if your objective is to get agreement on these facts, that is quite possibly unmediatable, because I can't change what someone else believes. You can present evidence, and if your evidence is not accepted, then we need to either move forward from that and see if there's a resolution that operates despite a disagreement as to the facts. Does that help?
That's your answer. So good, thank you. Another one from our astute professor at CSU is, how does one mediate with a Trump-like character in the room?
Um, Again, it's a matter of trying to establish um, what the interests are. I mean, if um, I read another a book called Talking to Crazy, um, which the first chapter of which says, you know, the first thing to do if somebody is irrational, or essentially irrational, or just simply not interested in agreeing on anything, is to not deal with them. Now, obviously, sometimes that's not an option. Often with family members, that's not an option. So then all you can try and do and say, I'm not going to agree with you on that. I'm not going to agree with you on this. But this is the immediate problem we have. Uh, and if there's if you're interested in finding a resolution that doesn't require me to agree with such and such, I'm willing to work on that.
So, how important is the reputation of the character of the mediator?
Well, this is a funny thing. I was involved in only one relatively big mediation before, where I was one of the parties, and the mediator was a retired federal judge. A lot of judges go into mediation, and okay, just one experience. I'm sure there are good former judge mediators out there, but all this guy did was separate the parties, and at issue was $2 million. I mean, it was a big case. uh, and say, well, if I was judge, I would rule this way. And then he'd go to the other side and probably said, well, if I was judge, I would rule, and he'd say something different. He was browbeating us into a settlement. I thought it was ridiculous. Um, there was no actual discussion. And of course, this was a civil suit with millions of dollars at stake, and lawyers on both sides, lots of lawyers. There were one, two, three, four, five parties. Um, uh, so, the lawyers weren't going to really lead the way on trying to meet something. They were zealously representing each of their parties. Um, so, so reputation. I don't know what you can do to find reputation. You can go to the mediation Association of Colorado, the MAC, and they have a list of the mediators who are registered with them, and that confirms that the mediator has been trained. There are no laws, by the way, in Colorado that require anybody can be a mediator. Just hang up a shingle and say I'm a mediator. But there are things like a Better Business Bureau for mediators is the MAC. I would interview potential mediators and ask them what their approach is. Short of that, if you know me, I can refer you to someone. I won't mediate for someone who I know well as a friend or something, because unless I know both sides, and then I might not even do that. But if I only know one side personally, um, I don't see how the other side would particularly feel comfortable with me being the mediator. Although I probably could do it as long as I told my friend, "Hey, I'm not going to lean one way or the other."
Uh, would you like to take down your PowerPoint so we can regain our
Oh,
facial connection?
I'm
And
sorry, I forgot about that.
I have one more. If there's, it is now 6:30, after a little after,
7:30.
and we're pretty much at the end. There is one more question. Comments with an army of, this was again our professor friend from CSU, with an army of lawyers on public expense accounts, our university has rigorously refused to agree to mediation. Any comments on that?
I um, the state of Colorado is like that all around. I worked for 5 years for the state controller's office as an attorney, and was responsible for reviewing contracts in advance. In other words, representing the state and trying to make them adhere to the law regarding what agreements the state's allowed to make. And I never understood why when they would get sued, and almost always the vast majority of the suits are prisoners seeking recompense for ill treatment in jail or mistakes on their release terms and things like that, or employees, disgruntled employees who have been let go or quit because of one issue or another. And uh, they sent those to the AG's office, and the AG's office is litigation minded, so they basically would start litigating and then let the lawyers settle. Um, and I'm sure generally leaving a lot of people unhappy on all sides. Um, so I think a lot of contracts in the commercial realm, certainly the years that I worked for companies, I spent 12 years with an IT company as a personnel director as well as general counsel. I put into our contracts that the parties agree to mediation. Now, arbitration, I can understand someone not wanting to agree to arbitration, and you have to distinguish that. Arbitration is a rent a lawyer. I'm sorry, rent a judge. You are agreeing that you'll present your evidence to a presumably impartial person or a panel of 3 impartial people, and whatever decision they come to, you're going to live with. No recourse to the courts. That's it. It's cheaper than going to court, but I don't think it's particularly designed to produce um, fair, peaceful, lasting resolutions.
And any other last questions before we did
I
it?
have a question, if I can get a comment from Randy or Bob, are people with more knowledge about macro peace building. Just if you care to say something real short or real long if you want, but people are going to sign off.
Ooh. So I guess I could, since you've put me on the spot, thanks, brother. I thought Bill had some really great questions, and I do believe that the character and reputation of the mediator is very important, especially in these larger conflict situations where you have entire countries and societies involved. I also happen to believe it's true in lawsuits. And generally, the people my experience in mediation was in Houston. And there, the mediators that were sought after were those who had a lot of litigation experience. And frankly, most folks did not particularly care for the former judges because they did tend to come in with that attitude. But particularly someone who had been a lawyer on both sides of the docket and had seen it from both sides, but also had a reputation for, real honesty in all of his or her dealings. I think that was real important, and therefore somebody who they would take very seriously, because it was interesting in I love your approach with the 3 different forms of mediation. But what I found in the mediations that I did was that I was constantly having to use some portion of all 3 of those, or some measure of all 3 of those, because with years of litigation experience, they tended to pay attention when I said, well, what are you going to do about this one piece of testimony that has been brought to my attention? How are you going to handle that? And of course, you always did that in private caucus. You never called anybody out in a general session. But I also think that a lot of those same, like best alternative to negotiated agreement is I think one of the most powerful concepts that, by the way, it was Roger Fisher at the Harvard Negotiation Project who came up with that among the, what he called the 7 elements of every negotiation. And I think it's one of the most powerful that you can use, as long as you use it wisely in a private session, rather than embarrass someone in a general session. But they need to understand what's at stake. If you don't reach an agreement today, what's at stake, and how likely are you to be able to prevail in the way that you think you will?
And then, Greg, with that, we'd like to honor what we tell people. We are 6:30 to 7:30. We've overrun that a little bit. We thank you very, very much, and we look forward to meeting you next month at a very exciting program on unconscious bias. So thank you all, and Greg, thank you. We applaud you for a great, great event. Very thankful for that, and very necessary. So thank you. And with that, we bid adieu.